Hi, George. Nice
Hello,
to see you.
Andrew. Very nice to be with you.
How are you doing?
Yeah. Things are busy, very busy. We have an increase in the referrals we get, as you know, Andrea. We get a lot of referrals for patients with uncontrolled diabetes, uncontrolled obesity.
It's just amazing. You know, we're both in similar fields to do with obesity, so type 2 diabetes and surgery for obesity. How did we get here? How would you define obesity? What is it? I think there's a lot of misconceptions about obesity. What's your feelings about that?
I completely agree with you. I feel there is a lot of wrong messages out there. People don't understand the real reason behind obesity. I don't think it is perceived as a disease, but rather as a psychosocial choice.
So when I first started, I didn't really understand why people were, coming to me to ask me to remove their stomach. Why? My sort of view was, why can't you just really go for a diet and really go for a good exercise regime, lose weight and keep it off? So I sort of was, like most doctors, most medics, not really understanding at all the whole mechanisms behind obesity. But the more the more people I saw and the more people suffering with obesity I saw, the more I sort of started to think, is it so simple as calories in, calories out? I mean, what's your perspective on that? Did you always understand obesity?
I think if it was as simple as calories in and calories out, we would probably be doing something different.
I think we would be. Actually, it's usually when they start dieting that the problems really start. And they've all gone through, almost identical types of diets. They'll go through all of these diets and say, yeah, I can lose some weight on a diet, but actually, then I'm still complying with the diet, I'm still on the diet, but actually the scales are not shifting anymore after a few weeks. And they all have this very similar story, and then they say, okay, then I just give up because I feel hungry, tired, and the weight's not shifting.
Is there something that perhaps healthcare professionals are missing, as well as the society? What is your view on drivers for weight gain?
Clearly we are missing something in our understanding of obesity. 70% of our basal metabolism, so the amount of energy that we just use by even before we move, is breathing, heart rate, immune system, heating the body. That's 70% of the energy that we use. But actually the thing that I think is misunderstood by even most doctors is that 70% energy expenditure is very dynamic. It can go downwards or upwards. One of the really surprising things was that, the amount of energy that a human uses, the amount of power, is the same as a light bulb. So to run a human body is the same as, if there was a light bulb on this table, that's how much powers you and me. If you imagine it like a dimmer switch. So if you, for instance, overeat, that energy expenditure will go up, the basal metabolism will go up. So it's a little bit like turning that dimmer switch upwards. So you burn more as you overeat. And then when you go on a diet and start starving yourself, that dimmer switch, your internal dimmer switch sort of goes down. It's a little bit like, might be before your time, the Ready Brek advert, where they've got, you've had your Ready Brek and you've got this glow inside you. You go outside, the children go outside, they've got this like glow. If you imagine, I imagine your basal metabolic rate being a little bit like that, but actually it can be quite hot and quite cold. And I think this is the thing that we really misunderstand as doctors trying to understand obesity. The body is trying to adapt to overeating, which is what actually most of the population do most of the time, or undereating, by putting that dimmer switch upwards or downwards.
I don't know about you, but it took me my whole life to find out about these indices of energy expenditure and obesity, pathophysiology. It's not something we were taught in the university.
So I'm sure it was a very similar curriculum, and we probably had, I can't remember any lectures on, because obesity wasn't seen as a disease at all.
Yes.
The training that we had in weight regulation was the same as a tabloid press reader. It's like, if you overeat and have too many burgers, you're going to put weight on, and the solution to that is to go on a diet and go to the gym. So it wasn't seen as actually a disease condition. So there was no lectures on it at all. But actually the really strange thing is that now we have, I was in medical school in the 1980s, you're probably 90s or, We didn't have a major obesity crisis then. Like there was, I think, less than 10% of people who are suffering with obesity. It's now over a third of people. So we're suddenly, a third of our patients, doesn't matter what speciality we're in, whether we're dermatologists, bariatric surgeons, orthopedic surgeons, whatever, a third of our patients suffer with obesity. And as you have become aware, it is a disease driven by sort of misfiring of signals, isn't it?
Yes.
Hormonal signals.
Yes, a plethora of problems leading to obesity. Do you think that things are changing? And what do you think could be missing from our point of view as healthcare professionals in supporting this?
I don't know, George. I mean, the WHO recognise obesity as a disease,
Yes.
but I still sort of suspect that most of our colleagues don't really see it as a disease and see it as a bit of a lifestyle choice. All of these preconceptions, sort of obesity stigmas, are still out there. And the really, really sad thing that I find is that patients think that as well. That affects their self-esteem so much that, yeah, actually, I'm in this condition. I've tried dieting. I just can't get out of it. Yeah, actually, I think I am weak-willed. That's a horrible thing for someone to think. And it's such a visual disease.
That's true. That's exactly what I see in my clinics as well. And these are patients who have tried all self-directed interventions at weight loss before, even support programs, even specialist advice. There's pathology and biology behind this. What is your view of ultra-processed foods? Is there a role in this pandemic? Do they drive the pandemic in some sense?
I sort of go by this theory that we all have our own individual weight setting, so like the weight set point theory. And that, you can go on a diet, so you'll lose a bit of weight, you'll run away from that weight set point, but you'll get pulled back by, the metabolism, the changes in our metabolism, that sort of dimmer switch that goes up and down. And I think our own individual sort of weight set points are determined by genetics. Some people naturally will put weight on if they're in a particular environment where there is processed food and Western foods. If you go to the developing world where they have a natural diet of local foods and they cook foods, the obesity rates are very, very low. If you go to any Western country, the obesity rates are around about a third of the population. And the reason for that is not the calories, I don't think. It's not the calories in the food. It's what the food does to your body. If you give a population a diet containing a lot of sugar and refined carbohydrates like pasta, wheat, cakes, bread, biscuits, plus vegetable oils, which is the Western diet basically, so fast foods, if you give them that, then you're affecting the levels of insulin in their body. And I think that has an effect on, our weight regulation. So I think it's not the calories in the Western diet. I think it's what the Western diet does to our bodies.
Yes, indeed. Definitely insulin resistance has an important role and leptin resistance as well. What is your view on that?
So the old-fashioned view of hunger and satiety, so when you feel full up, was that you would have such a big meal that your stomach would distend and you would get full.
Yes.
I think the new view on satiety is that once food trickles into your intestine, you get a release of those hormones, GLP-1, PYY, which go to your hypothalamus and, give you satiety. So that's the signal to stop eating. I think the main thing with the Western diet is the effect on the leptin system. So leptin comes from our fat.
Released in the adipose tissue, as you said, and closely regulated by the release of insulin as well.
Yeah.
And we know that in obesity and other states, for example, polycystic ovary syndrome, as you know, is a very common endocrinopathy, women of reproductive age, very, very common. And it is associated with insulin resistance, lack of transport of insulin and the CNS, and that also affects leptin release, and definitely affects our hunger and our weight.
Yeah, I mean, I think, so as far as sort of our understanding of obesity is concerned, I think there are several, but probably three really simple areas that actually doctors and even the population don't understand, but actually if they understood those, they would just get obesity, they would understand it. Now the first one is, as we mentioned before, metabolic adaptation. So this thing where your dimmer switch goes upwards and downwards. So suddenly you're burning a load of energy. And then suddenly when you go on a diet, you're actually not burning much at all. And this is the reason that you can comply with the diet and be on 1,000, 1,200 kilocalories a day, but the scale's not shifting. Your body is cold, I think the second misunderstanding of obesity is this weight set point theory. So everyone has their own individual weight setting. You can try and run away from it in the gym or dieting, but actually the anger is going to pull you back to where you are. And your genetics determine a little bit of your weight set point, but actually the environment, so the type of food you eat. And that goes on to, where that weight anchor is, where that weight set point is, goes on to actually, determined by leptin resistance. It's a typical, negative feedback biological system. So it's the same as, our hydration system, because the body's going to self-regulate. It's going to, like, if you drink a lot of water, you're going to pee. If you actually don't drink for a day, your urine goes very, very dark. And it's exactly the same, I think. Well, we now know there's a lot of good evidence that it's the same feedback system with eating. So just as if you over-drink, you will expend that fluid in the bathroom. Just as you overeat, your metabolism, that dimmer switch, goes upwards and it just burns it off.
Exactly. And I think this is exactly what you just mentioned, the adaptation to thermogenesis.
That description of self-regulation of our weight is crucial to understand obesity. So basically the hormone that actually does that, turns the dimmer switch up and down, is leptin. And as you know, leptin comes from our fat cells. So if you put on a lot of weight, you just have a higher leptin level in your bloodstream.
Yeah.
That leptin is then read by the hypothalamus, which is the master controller of our weight. So the leptin is read by the hypothalamus, and it basically is a fuel gauge. So if you've got a lot of fuel on board, fat on board, the leptin level will be high, and the hypothalamus will say, okay, we're fine. We can switch down hunger, we can switch up that basal metabolism, we can switch up the dimmer switch, and we're okay, we can keep on an even keel. If you lose a load of weight and fat, that leptin signal goes down. The hypothalamus is thinking, well, hang on, we're running a little bit on empty here.
Yes.
Let's switch up the appetite and switch down that dimmer switch, the metabolism, and readjust our weight back up to the weight set point. Now, leptin resistance is where these signals start to go wrong, because the hypothalamus can't read that leptin signal anymore. The thing that blocks it is insulin is one area that blocks leptin. So they have a very similar signaling pathway, I think, in the hypothalamus. So the higher your insulin level, the more it's going to block the leptin signal. So the brain is receiving conflicting signals. It's receiving signals that the leptin level is low, so the appetite is switched up, the metabolism is switched down, and you get voracious appetite and feeling quite tired. Now, those signals are typical of leptin resistance. They're not because that person is naturally hungry or lacks willpower or is lazy.
Yes.
It's a symptom of the disease. What we wish we'd learned in medical school about obesity all those years ago. What's your view on that? What do you think we should have learned?
I don't think we've been taught anything really. Obesity is a complex multifactorial disease. It is an outcome of a plethora of genetic, epigenetic changes. I wish I was taught that really. I wish I was taught that managing patients with obesity is not a one-man's task. It is a multidisciplinary process. It involves multiple specialities because patients with obesity have different needs and require support.
What do you think is the sort of biggest misconception as far as what the general population think about obesity? Do you think it is just the fact that it's just this simplified energy and energy outputs?
I think that's mainly it, but also the fact that being unable to lose weight and sustain any lost weight is because of lack of willpower.
We're basically talking about fat storage, so the amount of energy in a body. And obviously fat is the main storage of energy.
Adipose tissue is an endocrine gland, an endocrine organ that releases hormones and regulates appetite as well as other processes. The known chronic low degree of inflammation that we know exists in obesity. So yes.
So this is I love this model. This is the weight of fat, and it looks like fat. When you do obesity surgery, this is what we see inside. Fat is amazing. It is an organ. It's just like the heart and the lungs and kidneys and things like that. And as you say, George, what we weren't taught at medical school is that this is an organ. It creates a function. I mean, what's the function, do you think?
So I think it is to release hormones to regulate our metabolism, our energy intake, our appetite, and our satiety.
So it's basically our gas tank, isn't it? It stores the energy that we might need if we're in an environment where there's suddenly no food, and then we can rely on the gas tank. But also, it's not just that. It self-regulates itself, doesn't it?
Yes.
Via this hormone called leptin. But also it produces a lot of different inflammatory hormones. It influences our appetite. So it basically self-regulates. And when we go to that really simplified energy in, energy out equation that we're taught at medical school, so this should equate 1 pound or half a kilogram of adipose tissue is the equivalent of 3,500 kilocalories a day. So if you eat McDonald's Big Mac meal is almost 1,000. So if we eat 4 of those on top of everything else, you're actually going to get this maybe spread around your whole body. 1 pound of fat is what the population of the Western world has been putting on every year. But actually, when you break down the increase in weight should have been in that time. I think between 1980 and 2000, the energy intake of an average American man went from 2,200 kilocalories a day to 2,700 kilocalories a day. So that's 500 kilocalories per day extra. This is 3,500. So that means every week, the average American man or Western man should have been putting this on. So in 1 year, that's about 4 stone per year. They're taking in all this energy, but it's not going into fat. It means that our weight regulation, despite overeating, is really, really accurate. In fact, it's to about 0.4%. So you'd have to take in only 11 kilocalories per day extra to put this on. So it sort of suggests that actually the body is in control, but it wants to put this weight on. It wants this. Do you think that's to do with what highly processed foods are doing to our bodies? That they're giving a signal?
I think they are altering the signals. Yes, they are.
Via leptin, you think?
Absolutely,
insulin?
yes. I think leptin plays a key role in this process. Also insulin does, and as you know, there's a close interaction between the two.
I find it stunning that, how can a human population who overeats so much, over-metabolize suddenly? And so you can be on 1,000 calories a day on a diet, but your body just gets used to it, it adapts to it. I think that explains, why our patients have so much difficulty long-term on diets. There's just so much adaptation the body makes. And not only that, but as you say, all of these hormones that go from your stomach and your intestines to your brain to make you feel voraciously hungry, almost like a parching thirst. These are things that really affects people's behavior.
Completely agree with you. I think we were not built to lose weight, and the society we live in nowadays doesn't facilitate this either. I agree with you that 70% of our total energy expenditure is our basic metabolic rate. But I think the key, if you agree with me, is in the rest of the calories. So we've got activity-related energy expenditure, but then we've got indices like diet-induced thermogenesis or the thermic effect of food, postprandial thermogenesis. And we know from experiments that there are certain groups of patients with obesity and insulin resistance that have blunted such signals. We're living in the era of ultra-processed foods. They don't have the classic effects we think in relation to only the calories they carry, but they have further effects. And as you know, I'm a fan of the gut-brain axis theory. We know from studies done in animals, but also studies done in humans, thanks to bariatric surgeons like yourself, that patients with overweight or diabetes or both tend to release less of the gut peptide hormones like GLP-1, glucagon-like peptide 1, PYY, and other hormones. This release is linked to a phenomenon we call the incretin effect, the passage of carbohydrates through the gastrointestinal tract. If you have glucose injected through a vein, you don't release insulin, you don't release GLP-1.
Yeah.
And then we know that in patients with overweight, patients with diabetes, they tend to produce less of these hormones. So we know that obesity and diabetes are stages of satiety resistance.
Weight set point is defined by the type of food that you eat and what that food is doing to you, plus things like your stress, your cortisol level, whether you're sleeping well or not, whether you've got family or work stresses, all of these things are having an effect. But actually the main thing is the type of food you eat.
Yes.
If it is ultra-processed, it's much more likely that it's going to have a lot of sugar, a lot of refined carbohydrate, and a lot of unhealthy and unnatural vegetable oils. And these all block leptin. So that crucial signal that the brain needs to use to understand how much energy is on board. The messages are broken by the ultra-processed foods. And you can sort of imagine it as the ultra-processed foods are almost like a drug that we're taking to signal to put weight on. My theory is that actually it's not the calories. You need the calories to put weight on, but the calories are there, you know. It's not the calories in the ultra-processed foods, it's the refined carbohydrates causing insulin to block leptin.
I agree with you. What I wanted to say is that, as you know, using the strict criteria as defined by WHO, obesity is defined as kilos per meter squared, using a BMI. So a BMI of 30 kilograms per square meter or higher would define obesity. But I think BMI is a crude marker. It doesn't really say a lot about the complexity of obesity as a disease and the consequences of obesity. What is your view on that?
You've got to factor in people's body shape.
Completely agree.
Yeah, I agree. It's very simple markers. So I think we've got to take into account the people, you know, who are suffering with overweight and obesity, you know, are much more likely to have obesity-related conditions.
There's a plethora of conditions. There's, I think, about 220 complications of obesity. Cardiovascular disease is one, cardiometabolic disease, risk for diabetes. I would say fertility issues, mechanical problems, osteoarthritis, also certain types of cancer, for example, prostate cancer, breast cancer, colorectal carcinoma, as well as many others, neurological and others.
So I agree that obesity causes a lot of diseases, but you know, the misconception is that obesity is not a disease. So the first point is that obesity is the primary disease, and that then causes the common ones that I see in my obesity clinic are obviously type 2 diabetes, hypertension, sleep apnea, where you wake up, you snore a lot, you wake up at night, infertility issues, like you say, mechanical issues, you know, osteoarthritis, difficulty getting around, depression as well. You know?
Yes.
And also this increased risk of cancer. So I think the key points that we've discussed are, you know, an understanding that we don't understand, or many people don't understand obesity. It's not taught in medical schools properly. And obesity is not, you know, defined as a disease in many people's brains. And, you know, the crucial three pillars of misunderstanding of obesity. So the fact that our metabolism turns upwards and downwards to defend against the set point that our body thinks is healthy for us, but actually quite often is not. And then this misfiring of energy signals, leptin resistance, the fact that there's that signal there, but it's not getting through to our brains.
I think the key points to take home is obesity is a multifactorial disease. It's not simply energy in and out. This is what we've been taught at the university. I agree with you that the set point theory is a very important thing to remember when it comes to describing obesity as a disease. Leptin resistance, leptin, a very major driver of energy regulation. So leptin resistance is an important pathway, signaling pathway.
Ultra-processed foods, the fact that it's not the calories, it's the fact that they act like a drug, altering our metabolism and giving us a signal to put weight on.
Yes, I agree. Obesity.
The big truth.